Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name's David Clough. I'm Professor of Theological Ethics at the University of Chester and Principal Investigator on the Christian Ethics of Farmed Animal Welfare project. And it's really nice to welcome you to the launch of our framework today. Just some housekeeping notes. Audio and video is switched off for all of you who are joining as part of the audience, so relax about that. But we look forward to engaging you through the text-based question and answers, and you should be able to see that through the menu on your screen on the right-hand side, a little question mark icon. You're welcome to put in comments or questions at any point during the presentation, and we're going to have a period of question and answer at the end, and look forward to responding to you. And you can either choose to be anonymous as you ask questions or give your name, so completely up to you. We look forward to your contributions. After the first 2 years of this Christian Ethics of Farm Animal Welfare project, we're really excited as a research team to be able to share a key piece of work, our policy framework for churches and Christian organisations. We're also working on an academic book and journal articles, but it's this framework that we hope will be of wide interest to churches and Christian organisations interested in learning more about the connections between Christian faith and animal farming and what action they can take in response. So we're very glad to have this time and to introduce the framework to you. Here's what we're going to cover over the next 60 minutes. I'm going to give a brief introduction to how we got to this point. We're really excited to be able to premiere an animated film introducing the project, so we'll show you that. Margaret, one of the researchers on the research team, is going to talk about how you can make practical use of the framework in different contexts. And then we're going to hear little bits from different people who've been involved in the project. So David Grummett and Siobhan Mullen are members of the CEFAW team, the research team, and Joyce De Silva and Mark Betson are two of our partner representatives, and they'll each be offering brief reflections. And that should give us 20 minutes or so at the end for the Q&A that I mentioned. So be ready to ask questions, and we'll look forward to engaging with you then. So let me tell you a bit about how we got to this point. I'm sure you'll be aware that there is a growing public interest in where our food comes from. And I think in particular how the animals we use for food are treated. As the UK leaves the European Union, we have to decide for the first time in a long time about our own independent decisions about animal welfare and environmental standards. I'm sure many of you will be aware of public debates about the agriculture bill that's just received royal assent and gone through Parliament, with lots of public concern about the threat of low welfare imports from the US chlorinated chicken and hormone treated beef, and there's toing and froing between the Lords and the Commons before a sort of compromise amendment was approved. So this is an issue of public interest. It's also an issue that connects with other issues of public concern, such as the welfare of human beings, wild animals, and the environment. And for me, one striking example of that during the COVID pandemic was the images of workers being going to slaughterhouses in the middle of the pandemic, which are in difficult places to be in at the best of times, and those places were often centres of COVID infections, and workers in those places are about 2/3 EU migrants. So the cluster of the ways in which what we do to animals connects with both human and environmental issues are really striking. Farmed animal welfare has strong connections to Christian faith and practice. But it's our sense that most Christians haven't recognised those connections, or known, or if they do recognise it, known very much about what to do as a result. And we don't think there have been good resources that address the question of how Christians could make these connections between Christian faith and farmed animal welfare. And so that's the need that we were trying to address within this project. So how did we go about it? Well, we gathered a research team that represented academics both with expertise in Christian ethics and Christian theology and farmed animal welfare science. And then we partnered with 13 different organisations to engage in conversation about our research, so they're making this a very strongly dialogic process. Those partners included 6 major UK churches: the Catholic Church, Church of England, Church of Scotland, Church in Wales, Methodist Church and United Reformed Church, represented at a senior level, such as Bishop John Arnold for the Roman Catholic Church, or national rural officers for Church of England, Methodist, URC. And then we invited other partners with relevant expertise: Compassion in World Farming, Pasture for Life, Christian animal groups like Anglican Society for the Welfare Animals, Catholic Concern for Animals, Quaker Concern for Animals, Pan-Orthodox Concern for Animals, a group of Christian vets, the Veterinary Christian Fellowship, and the Ecumenical Church Investors Group, who manage assets on behalf of churches. We made a successful funding bid to the Arts and Humanities Research Council that have supported this research, and that enabled us to start a process 2 years ago of working on the project. Over the last 2 years, we've been engaged in lots of conversation, but we've also got out to farm sites with research team and partner representatives, so that we could discuss how animals were being farmed in the context of first-hand experience of what was going on. And then we started writing as a research team about why Christians as Christians should care about farmed animals, and how Christian communities might make ethical decisions about the impact that their actions have on farmed animals. There's one image of me and some delightful organic pigs, which was one of the very happy farm visits. And then Siobhan, our farm animal veterinary specialist, helped us understand what the different species of farmed animals in the UK need to flourish. And this idea of flourishing as creatures of God was a sort of key focus for the way we wanted to approach a Christian perspective on farmed animal welfare. And then we considered how far the flourishing of these different species of animals is possible in the different contexts in which they're farmed in the UK. And so here's an example table from our policy framework, where we've reviewed what pigs need to flourish, and then what the welfare issues are in farming pigs. And then here's our table demonstrating the ways in which different certification schemes interact with key welfare issues that we've identified. And so we met regularly with partner representatives all through the project and discussed successive drafts of this framework before reaching this final version. So this is the 4th draft, and we received lots of comments on 3 previous drafts. And we also got feedback from a wider range of stakeholders. And so it's really important to us that the framework is a product of this dialogue between the research team and our partner representatives and the other people we've had feedback from. And we want to very strongly record our thanks, both to partner representatives and to the other people who provided feedback, which has helped produce the framework that we have. And so here's the result of that work. We're delighted with how it looks. We've just in the post just today got the first print copies of the framework, which has been a really exciting moment. I hope what you'll find, if you've had the chance to look at it, or do get the chance to download it, what I hope you'll find is that it's a very engaging report. We've got some beautiful photographs of farmed animals, and I hope you'll find it something that you'll enjoy picking up and looking through. And you can both download this for free from our website, but also request a free print copy of your own. And so we've been showing the project website address, and please visit that at any point to request your copy of the framework or download it in PDF. So we're really keen to, go beyond the point of publication of this framework to encourage people to engage with it. And so one of the things we want to do beyond the framework is produce resources that will help people work with it and engage with it. And the first of those resources that we want to share with you during this launch event is a short animated video that we've just managed to complete work on, which gives an overview of the project. And so we're going to share that with you now. Humans relate to animals in all kinds of ways. Our use of animals for food involves far more animals than other uses. Christians believe that God is the creator of all creatures and wills their flourishing. What humans eat places them in a direct relationship with farmed animals and their welfare. So how can Christians demonstrate their belief that God creates all creatures to flourish, including farmed animals? A team of researchers with expertise in Christian ethics and veterinary science spent 2 years in discussion with representatives of UK churches and other partner organisations. We propose an approach to farmed animal welfare rooted in the idea of animals flourishing as creatures of God. A focus on flourishing means paying attention to whether farmed animals are able to live out the kind of life that is particular to them. Farmed animals will flourish only when farmers, farm workers and rural communities flourish. Farmers need fair prices, enabling them to offer a good life to the animals in their care. A holistic concern for flourishing will also recognise the connections between animal agriculture, the climate crisis, and the global loss of biodiversity. So how do different farmed animals flourish, and how might that be improved? Farmed animals remain very similar to their wild ancestors in what they need to flourish. Chickens prefer outdoor environments with shelter from trees, like the jungle fowl they were bred from. Given the chance, pigs like rooting in the earth and adopt behaviours like wild boar. But most chickens, fish and pigs are now raised in monotonous environments that don't allow them to express preferred behaviours. Mutilations such as beak trimming, nose ringing, tail docking and castration are used to make animals easier to manage in modern systems, but are painful and also prevent them doing the things they enjoy most. Giving and receiving maternal care is an important part of what it means for mammals and birds to flourish. But hens never meet their chicks in modern poultry systems, and cows farmed for milk have their calves removed soon after birth. Flourishing is also connected to length of life. Chickens have been bred to grow so rapidly that they reach slaughter weight in broiler systems in just 40 days, able to do little more than eat and rest. Lambs and pigs are killed at just a few months of age. We evaluated systems and UK certification schemes according to whether they enabled a flourishing life for farmed animals. Some systems were rated as offering poor opportunities for flourishing. Schemes we rated as better took steps to avoid mutilations, provided enriched environments, and bred animals with more attention to their natural biology. Schemes we rated as best available go further in providing animals with environments in which they can flourish, such as access to pasture. We also identified further improvements beyond those widely available in commercial systems, some of which are being pioneered by farmers at a small scale. So Christians have strong faith-based reasons to be concerned about the flourishing of farmed animals as fellow creatures of God. Churches and Christian organisations should avoid sourcing animal products from systems offering poor opportunities for their flourishing, and switch to those we rate as better, or preferably best available. Farming systems that enable better animal flourishing produce fewer animals at higher cost. Consuming fewer, higher welfare animal products makes shifts affordable and helps meet environmental goals too. Farmers need support in making changes to improve the flourishing of their animals. Churches can help by making links with local farmers supplying high welfare animal products. Farmed animal welfare is an issue everyone can respond to. Local churches can respond by rethinking the food they serve. Church schools can consider their catering service and curriculum. Christian organisations can reflect on their role as consumers or retailers of animal products. Christian investors can consider how companies they invest in impact on the lives of farmed animals. Church members can also think about the animal products they purchase and eat at home. Christians should take practical steps to improve farmed animal welfare, reflecting their faith that God wills the flourishing of all creatures. For more information about how your church or Christian organisation can respond, including ideas and resources, visit the project website. Great. So you see there the first of our resources which we will help people engage with the policy framework. We'll be uploading that video to YouTube, and so we hope that could be useful. For example, if you wanted to have a gathering of people to get an introduction to the project, the video might be useful to show people as a sort of first sense of what we've been involved with. Okay, so I've given you an overview. We've shown you the video, which would be the first resource we hope will be useful introducing people to the framework. I'm now going to hand over to a fellow member of the research team, Dr. Margaret Adam, who's going to talk about how you might make practical use of the framework in different organisational contexts. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. When you open this document on your screen or in your hand, if you order a print copy, you'll see that it has text, photos, and tables with tick boxes. You may not feel like settling in to read it all in one sitting, and we're not expecting you to. If you are part of your church's social justice group, you might want to start in at the end of the policy framework with the recommendations in part 2. Some of these recommendations might overlap with the priorities your group has already identified. You might be interested in working for fair contracts for farmers and better working conditions for farm workers. Maybe that would fit with your fair trade projects or with the engagements with public policy you are already involved with. Then you might look at the needs of specific farmed animals described in part 3. What actions could you take to incorporate farmed animal welfare into your social justice agenda? Does your church have a regional or denomination-wide social justice network, or an environmental advisory group, or a climate change committee? Tell them about the policy framework with a note encouraging them to see animal welfare, human well-being, and environmental concerns as parts of a whole rather than as competing priorities. If you are part of your church's Bible study group or book group, you could try reading a short section in the framework together. For example, there are 3 paragraphs on Christian ways to think about dominion in farmed animals. And there are 2 paragraphs on Christian ethics, farmed animals, and sustainability. Read and discuss these together. Look at the biblical passages mentioned in the text and talk about how they are interpreted in the framework. Do you agree? Maybe 4 people could each read one of the 4 parts and then talk about what they read with the group. Then you might meet with your church's social justice group to talk about adding concern for farmed animal welfare to your priorities, projects, and activities within the congregation. Or what do you know about your denomination's land investments or ownership of land? Are there policies in place for land use that take farmed animal welfare into account, or that support farmers trying out new farming systems that improve animal welfare? Reach out to an investment representative and point them to the framework's recommendations for Christian investors and policymakers. The framework can help organizations establish or revise their priorities for land use to benefit people and animals. If you are involved in a school as a teacher, head, catering staff, governor, interested parent, or student, you might look at the framework as a resource for considering your school's food policy. Check out the analysis of assurance scheme with its focus on farmed animal flourishing. You could set up a meeting with the catering staff to review the sources of animal products they purchase for school meals. Together, you could explore higher welfare alternatives using the information in the framework and investigate local options. Make a sign for the cafeteria with the names and photos of high welfare farms supplying your animal products. Take students on a field trip to one of the farms. You could experiment with adding some more plant-based dishes to the week's menu to balance out the potentially higher costs for higher welfare animal products and to introduce plant-based nutritional alternatives. In classrooms, you could assign portions of the policy framework to students to complement their studies. They could read Part 3 to learn about farmed animal behavior research in connection with their biology studies. They could draw on the framework for information about assurance schemes, how they are labeled on food packaging, what those labels suggest, and what they really mean about farmed animals living indoors. Math and economics students could investigate the costs of animal products, comparing farmers, retailers, and consumers' prices. Social studies students could read Part 2 to examine the effects of different farming systems on animals, farm workers, and consumers. Religious studies students and ethics students could read Parts 1 and 2 for a Christian theological foundation for farmed animal ethics and compare it to other religious and philosophical bases for animal ethics. Politics students will find much to draw on in the framework that might influence local council policy and national policy shifts after Brexit. The animal photos in the framework are gorgeous. Order a free print copy of the framework. You could show the photos to crash students at story time and point out what helps farmed animals flourish. Calves like to stay with their mums. Chickens like to peck in the dirt. Pigs like to root in the dirt and grass with their big snouts. Then could gather together some of the teaching staff, catering staff, and students who have engaged with the policy framework and talk with parents and governors about community-wide projects that reflect their study and experience and extend actions beyond the classroom and cafeteria. Or, if you work with a Christian charity, you might want to approach the policy framework first by just flipping through to see which headings strike you as potentially related to your work. Maybe you're interested in the concept of flourishing as it applies to the people you support. The framework's presentation of flourishing addresses farmed animals and humans. Maybe you're an animal advocacy group wanting to work with churches, or perhaps your focus lies closer to the farming and local communities section, or sustainability in the global economy. While you are considering connections, you might want to adopt a default veg approach to your group's lunch meetings. Default veg means that the default food choice is plant-based, and people can request a meat option if they like, instead of the default being animal products with special requests for plant-based alternatives. And finally, if you are bored during lockdown and looking for interesting reading material, check out Part 5, Resources and Further Reading. You'll find suggestions for lay audiences, as well as academic books and articles, websites and reports. While we are still in lockdown and unable to eat out at restaurants, you might want to read an article about the complex behavior and cognitive skills of chickens and red jungle fowl while you eat your homemade mushroom stroganoff. However you approach the policy framework, you'll find ways to connect your faith, your commitments, and your everyday actions with improving farmed animal welfare. We are excited about sharing the policy framework with you, and we hope you will share it widely. Please keep in touch and let us know how you are using it or how you want to use it. Tell us how we can help you use it in your context. We welcome your input and experience. And remember to join us in the webinars that start in January. They will focus on what the framework is all about and how to use it in your particular settings. Thank you for being here and for your interest in this project.
Thanks very much, Margaret. So I hope that's whetted your appetite for diving into the framework and giving you a sense of how it could be used in different contexts. And I'd like to emphasise we're at the beginning of the final funded year of this project, not the end. So we're keen on working with you to develop other resources that could be useful in implementing the framework in different contexts. So as Margaret says, do be in touch with us. We'd be really keen to hear how we can continue to help you in making use of the framework. I'd now like to introduce two other members of the research team. First of all, my colleague, Dr. David Grummett, who's from the School of Divinity at the University of Edinburgh and is the ethicist on DEFRA's Animal Welfare Committee. Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure and really exciting to be part of developing this ambitious but deliverable framework. I've worked on Christian theology and food for some years, but I've become increasingly convinced that how we treat animals in farming is absolutely fundamental to this. Perhaps as Christians today, we need to rediscover a bit what this means for the way we approach our life and practice our faith. After all, Christians were key in establishing the RSPCA, and in many Christian churches up and down the country, farmers are important members and farming communities are supported in really important ways. But what do we want to say about how we treat the animals themselves? As a project concerned with Christian ethics, this is about how we motivate people to behave, as well as how we scientifically understand animal welfare. One of the things I'm excited that we're contributing to is helping move the debate away simply from how to stop animals feeling pain and suffering, of course that's important, but to promoting flourishing in a whole range of ways. We think of particular issues among particular species, whether it's beak trimming of chickens or confining pigs in fowering stalls surrounded by metal rather than allowing them to nest naturally, or chopping bits off cattle, horns, or castrating them, for instance. All these things, there are ways of working around and potentially eradicating, and we need to think about how this can be done in a way that promotes the health and welfare of animals. And giving animals outdoor access is also really important. Many animals are hardly ever allowed outside. So yes, it's been great to be part of this and to produce a document that I hope will help individuals think about how they shop, church communities about their catering and preaching, the national churches about how they invest their money and use their land, and all of us to think about how we may positively influence government policy.
Thanks so much, David. And now I'll turn to another co-investigator on the project, Dr. Siobhan Mullen from Bristol Vet School. Welcome, Siobhan.
Thanks, David. Well, when David first got in contact with me, I guess it was a pretty unusual request to receive within a veterinary school. I've been a veterinary surgeon in practice originally, and then gradually started doing more research focused on animal welfare. And David sort of said, well, you know, we want to do this project, and what we really need is just, you know, a little bit of information about how animals kind of, you know, experience the world and so on. So, you know, we talked and talked some more, and then it became clear that, you know, perhaps there were other elements which we could bring around the sort of delivery of change, because actually, you know, animal welfare science had long moved on from just being able to understand animals to really thinking about how these things could play out within policy. So my role within the project was very much to try and facilitate farm visits and conversations then around the experiences that animals have within these farming systems, and thinking not just about avoiding the negatives, but around this concept that we had termed the good life, you were calling flourishing, you know, essentially positive experiences for animals. And we had a pretty intensive farm visit program, particularly perhaps the first one that I arranged, where we had a number of farms to visit within a couple of days. And what became clear to me during that time was that as equally important as viewing the animals and talking about the animals was being able to talk to farmers who are at the sharp end of caring for these animals, and also, of course, they're locked within a system around them, so where they are able to buy and sell their animals from, the prices that they get, and so on. And the farmers really gave us, you know, a great insight into the constraints that they are operating under, what they would like to do if they were able to, the things that were important to them, and so on. And I think it's fair to say that not all the visits were pleasant in one sense. You know, it was quite challenging to be on some of the farms, and we deliberately didn't shy away from that. You know, we went to some great, really, you know, innovative farms, but also some pretty standard intensive farms as well. And I think the final area of conversation which we really wrestled with, which perhaps the degree that we, you know, really thought about these issues is not completely reflected within the framework, although there are elements there, is around the intersection between animal welfare and other sustainability issues, climate change, biodiversity, or whatever. And we really realised that the framework is focused on animal welfare specifically, but it doesn't play out in a void of all other concerns. So to that end, I think we will kind of continue these discussions, and we recognise that there's more work to do there. But from my perspective, it's been, I don't like to talk about it in the past tense. We're even continuing for another year, but it's hugely enjoyable, and I'm delighted to be part of the project.
Thanks very much indeed, Siobhan. So you've met 4 members of the research team, but I've talked about how crucial the role of our partner organisations has been throughout the process. And so we wanted to include a couple of contributions from our partners. And turning first of all to Dr. Joyce Da Silva, who's Ambassador Emeritus for Compassion in World Farming. Over to you, Joyce.
Thank you, David. Compassion and Well Farming is really delighted to have worked with David and his team and the other partners in this project. It's been an absolute pleasure. We know that millions of animals are kept in factory farms in the UK, and you might go around the countryside and you see cows on the field, but these aren't the animals we're talking about. These are the animals you never get to see because they're kept indoors throughout their lives. And they may be kept in cages, on slatted floors, even on concrete. They're often bred to grow too fast, like the chickens that are farmed for meat. And they grow from a tiny fluffy chick to a couple of kilos in weight in just 5 or 6 weeks. And that's really unnatural, and many of them go lame as a result. And today's dairy cow now produces up to 10 times more milk than her calf would have suckled from her. But of course, the calf is taken away, and the cow often struggles to produce the amount of milk that we take from her for ourselves. And so their lives are drastically shortened. And some animals can't even turn around or walk, like the sows who are forced into farrowing crates to give birth to their piglets and while they're suckling them. So I'm so glad that this project is going to help Christians, and indeed people of any other faith or no faith at all, to understand the impact of their food choices on the well-being of animals. And I think the project will help people to make positive ethical choices. It will help them to reduce their overall meat consumption and to choose meat, eggs, and dairy products from animals who've been given the opportunity to flourish, who've smelled fresh air and felt the sun on their backs and been able to enjoy a more natural life. So Compassion and Well Farming really hopes that Christians and their churches across the country will embrace this project, read the terrific policy framework document being launched today, and hasten the day when all farm animals can lead a good life. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joyce. Finally, the Church of England has been represented by Reverend Dr. Mark Betson, who's the National Rural Officer. Mark can't join us live today, but he's kindly provided this video with his response to the project.
Hello, I'm Mark Betson and I'm the National Rural Officer for the Church of England and one of the partners as part of the Christian Ethics of Farmed Animal Welfare project. Farmed animal welfare may not seem immediately to be a particular concern for Christianity, but that is to ignore our own creatureliness, our bodily nature, and any concern for our environment. Both biblically and biologically, we are connected to the animals we share this world with. Biblically, as originating from God, and biologically, in sharing the same basic needs for things like food and shelter. Our connectedness, though, goes much deeper, and perhaps we are most closely connected with those animals we are directly responsible for. Farmed animals depend on us and provide for us food and other products. At the heart of the ethics of farmed animal welfare, it is about that relationship, and the nature of our relationships is very much an issue of faith. Our faith is there to help us make choices about the types of relationships we have and what defines those relationships. For our farmed animals, is it purely a utilitarian transaction based on best financial value, or do we want to go deeper? The framework document being launched today raises questions for us to debate these issues as part of our faith. Of course, for most of us as consumers, we are one step removed from those who actually farm. And equally, this framework highlights the importance of our relationships with those who do. Again, how do we value what the farming community does for us? The framework is intended to highlight the debate and is certainly not the last word in it, for Christians to reason and respond in faith when they are faced with issues ranging from the meat we purchase when we visit the supermarket to balancing food production with biodiversity and climate in the policy decisions we make. These are issues for all of us, and a debate that we need to have.
Never have I been happier to see Mark's face on the screen. Thanks very much to Mark, thanks to Joyce, and I'd like to underline our thanks to all of the partners and the partner representatives on the project, which have been really crucial to getting us to this point. We're now going to move on to the final section of today's launch, which is the question and answer session. And I'd like to introduce the final member of the research team, Dr. Paul Hurley from the University of Southampton, who's been carefully reading and evaluating your questions and is now going to put some questions to us as members of a panel. Over to you, Paul.
Great, thank you, David, and thank you everyone for submitting questions. There's been some really fascinating stuff coming up. I don't think we're going to have time for all of them, so I'm going to sort of start from the beginning, and then some of them are overlapping anyway. So the first one was about supermarkets. Somebody asked whether the project engaged with supermarkets and restaurant chains, and if so, was their response predictable or inspiring? Somebody else also asked a question of the role of retailers in implementing the framework, and if this connected to Compassion's work. So I'm not sure who would like to respond to that. Perhaps David or Siobhan?
Shall I have a start?
Please. Yeah.
So the primary audience we see for this framework is groups that identify with a Christian concern to engage the world. So we're thinking primarily it's going to be churches at different levels, at national level, at regional, diocesan levels, at local congregational level who might be interested, or other kinds of organisations that have a commitment to be thinking about what their practice means in relation to Christian values. So we think immediately of church schools or Christian charities, other kinds of Christian organisations. But we're really keen to think about the connections that the question points out in relation to those wider systems. So Siobhan talked about how we spent a lot of time hearing from farmers about what it's like trying to make a living from animal agriculture in the UK at the moment. And we came away from this 2 years of dialogue from the project strongly convinced that farmers are only going to be able to make changes if they have the support of consumers and retailers and wholesalers and a whole sort of range of sort of complex systems. And so the audience, the primary audience we imagine for the framework, churches and Christian groups, have a responsibility, I think, to think of themselves in terms of the impacts of their consumption and their engagement in food retail and where their investments are placed and so on, to recognise the role that they can play in these wider complex connections that are going to be required in order to make shifts in improvements in farm animal welfare.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else want to comment on that? So another question we had was about whether this is a UK only project or international, and comment about animal welfare in the USA. I know there's been ambitions to develop the project, but perhaps we won't talk about those here. But just keep our fingers crossed. Another question about the NFU, actually, whether the NFU had been involved, and I think that connects to what you were just talking about there, David, but maybe Siobhan would like to respond to that.
Yeah, so we've had engagement in a number of ways, but one very memorable way was, in fact, on one of our first farm visits, we shared a lunch with the NFU Dairy Board and then a subsequent tour of a dairy farm. And so that was really important, I think, in understanding not only what individual farmers are feeling, but also at the kind of policy level, the sorts of decisions and areas that the NFU is having to think about and engage with. And also, it was very interesting to see their views as we went round the farm and the things that they picked up on, which, maybe were different or, had sort of particular nuances. So that's kind of one very particular way. But as an organisation, at the kind of higher policy level, we have not really had much discussion with them directly, but that is to come potentially.
Thank you. And that perhaps leads nicely on to another question that's just come in from somebody who says that they're a farmer and a volunteer at a food bank. Why didn't you have active farmers on the panel? And given the price of food is lower now than it was, milk being cheaper per litre than it was in 1995, how do you expect people who are financially stretched to be able to cope with the higher prices? So I think this is a question about, you know, the higher prices connected with higher welfare and the sort of social elements of that, which I think are really important. Is there something you'd like to talk about, Margaret or David?
Margaret, do you do, or shall I have a go?
I'll say very briefly something, which is one of the things we learned from the very beginning of starting was that we really needed to include more farmers' voices, and we needed to learn more from farmers. And we were struck early on about how difficult the situation right now is for farmers, and the tendency for people talking about farmed animal welfare to look to farmers as if they are the problem. So we didn't make this a whole structure from farmers' perspectives, but we definitely learned to shift our perspective to the systems that are the problem, and that the farmers and farm workers need as much support as possible. But David, you might say more?
Yeah, in the end, I think we want to resist the idea of a zero-sum game between the interests of consumers and retailers and farmers. We think that farmers obviously have a key role to play in caring for animals and in what farm animal welfare standards are like. But we want to respect the agency farmers and farm workers have, but also recognise the limits of that agency in relation to these wider systems. And so, as a proportion of income, people are spending less money on food than they used to, and they're consuming much more animal products than, say, our grandparents would have, because of these radical new technologies that have made animal products cheaper than ever. And so we need to find a way forward if we're going to have regard to both human well-being and animal welfare and environmental welfare that look for practical changes that are going to be introducing improvements without significant sort of costs elsewhere. And the recommendation that we make in agreement with a lot of other analyses is the combination of reducing overall consumption of animal products, but making the animal products we do consume higher welfare, and rewarding farmers fairly for improvements in farm animal welfare, that combination can be a good way of respecting the interests of farmers and consumers and other sort of stakeholders in the chain. Siobhan, do you want to add a comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to draw your attention to quite an interesting initiative in the Netherlands, which sought to increase welfare standards whilst also protecting farmer income. So essentially, the major retailer supermarkets got together and decided they wanted to have higher standards for chicken that they would sell in their supermarkets. And they then essentially guaranteed the price for effectively a shed of birds, which would have been the same as when the farmer would have received prior to that making the high welfare changes. So that was a really interesting way of doing it and unusual. So the farmers didn't lose out. The retailers effectively were delivering on what they felt were consumer demands for higher welfare products. The price of the chicken in the shops might be interested to know is slightly higher. And importantly, for chicken, the supermarkets had to be quite innovative in thinking how to use the whole bird, because normally there's a big, we eat a lot of white meat in Europe and less brown meat that tends to get exported. And to everyone's slight surprise, actually the sales of this higher welfare chicken, which is all that's available now in these retailers, has actually increased even with the higher cost.
Great, thank you, Siobhan. A question maybe leading on from that. Somebody has said, wouldn't it be better to encourage people to move to a wholly or mainly plant-based diet, which connects obviously to questions of human health as well as to planetary health? I wonder if that's something that you could respond to, Joyce, from Compassion, as a partner with Compassion.
Sure. Well, I think, you know, that's a kind of ideal that we may all get to in 100 years. But I think that for the moment, a lot of people do still want to eat meat. I think people are open to reducing the amount of meat they eat. And so what Compassion would say, and I think we very much echo the tone of this project as well, is eat less animal products overall. And then that frees you up to choose what may be slightly more expensive, the higher welfare, the better or the best quality animal products. And so you're giving the animals a chance of a decent life. But also we know that, you know, livestock farming has huge impacts on global warming, on the protection of the environment and biodiversity, and animals in factory farms get soy imported from Brazil, so the forest is cut down. You know, there are so many links here. And also there's very strong evidence that eating too much, certainly processed meat like bacon and ham and so on, or even red meat, is not great for your health. So by eating less and eating better, you do yourself a favour, you do the environment a favour, you do climate a favour, and the animals as well.
Thank you, Joyce. Margaret, did you have something to add?
I want to come right out and say explicitly, this is not a project that wants to make you become a vegan. That's a concern or a fear that a lot of people have had. But the concern is that we all begin where we are and we meet each other where we are. And right now, that means a lot of people in the UK are purchasing and consuming animal products. As Christians, we want to think about what that means and what is our relationship between our faith and the lives that the animals are living. And that's the beginning point of the project. So whatever you eat, this project is probably interesting for ways to think about how Christians live their lives and how farmed animals live their lives. Thanks.
Great. That connects to the next question I was going to read out, which was about so the Anglican Society for the Welfare of Animals have introduced Animal Welfare Sunday, which was the first Sunday of October. And how might this be observed by other churches and be an ecumenical initiative? Was a question there. There was also another question about if there were any examples of Christian groups that have made connections with local farmers. So perhaps if anybody has any thoughts on either of those, of the relationship or the kind of practices that churches themselves can do. I wonder if David Grummett would like to refer, or David Clough. Great.
Go ahead, David.
Oh, well, yes, I'm happy to begin at least. Ecumenically, I think different churches have different ways of honouring animals and actually reducing meat consumption. Coming back to Joy's point, in Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, there are fast periods through the year when meat might not be eaten, and this brings people to think carefully about all their dietary decisions. In evangelical churches, there are traditions of free periods of fasting, not in particular seasons, but whenever one wishes, or cutting meat or animal products out of one's diet. Also, for instance, in the Salvation Army and Methodism, there are traditions around dietary discipline. So I think it's partly about rediscovering these and making sense of them for ourselves as individuals and church communities in the present day. In terms of how local churches are supporting farmers, there are some good networks, including some with national organisation, that are making pastoral support in terms of people, but also potentially funding available for farmers who are going through hard times. I think it's also important not to underestimate how important a Harvest Festival is as a focus on agriculture in local communities. And maybe sometimes we focus too much on arable production there and not enough on what animals contribute.
Super, thank you, David. I think we've just got another couple of minutes, so if I can squeeze in a couple of quick questions. One is about in kind of how we kind of mainstream these concerns within churches and what we can learn from the strategies of other ethical movements like Fair Trade and Make Poverty History, which have obviously both been very impactful. Did anyone have any comments on that, or of how the project's sort of looking to those other movements? David, well, yeah.
I could have a first go at that. So we're hoping this report and the supporting resources that we're producing might be a catalyst for local congregations, churches at making environmental policy at sort of regional, diocesan level, and national churches to think, where does consumption of food and consumption of animal products feature in the work of our church and organisation, and how could we think well about the impact that we're having on farmed animal welfare through our actions? And so we hope that it could be a catalyst for people picking up the report and saying to a local PCC or church council, how might this relate to the next time we're serving food, or any of the other practical details that Margaret was raising, or where does the consumption of farmed animals feature in our sustainability strategy or our climate change work or our environmental practice? So we're hoping that the next time anyone bumps into one of those questions, this policy framework could be saying, OK, we know where to look. We've got a clear Christian analysis, and we've got some practical recommendations for how we could build in attention to farm animal welfare in relation to the other things that we're interested in. And so we hope that the project might play a role in that mainstreaming of the issue. So perhaps, one way of framing it is it might become as natural for local churches to be thinking about the lives of animals behind the animal products involved in church meals as it is for them to think about fair trade tea and coffee.
Fantastic, thank you. That's coming to the end of our time for the Q&A. Thank you everyone who's put questions in. I think we've managed to attend to most of them directly or indirectly. Apologies if we've missed anything. The last one was about how many people have been attending this hour. I believe it's 36 people, which is great. So it's great to have you all here. I'm sure David will tell you about how you can carry on being involved in the project. But thanks all for questions. Back over to David.
Thanks so much, Paul, for that. If you've got other questions that we haven't got to, please feel free to be in touch with us. As I say, we're not going anywhere. We're working on this project and keen to be engaging people interested in working out how to use this framework through the next funded year of the project. And we've also, as Paul hinted, we've got ideas for projects that might follow on from it. So we're thinking of a follow-on project that might engage particularly education, and so thinking about how this might figure in the work of school policy and curriculum resources. So if you're an RE teacher with interest in any of those interests, do get in touch. And we're also looking at exploring how we could assess how local congregations in international contexts could use this as a resource for their thinking. So do keep in touch with us. As Margaret mentioned, one thing we're doing in the new year is offering a programme of webinars that go into more depth about different aspects of the project. So in January, we'll be thinking about why Christians should care about farmed animal welfare. In February, thinking about the flourishing of particular species of farmed animals. In March, thinking about some of those questions we've had about economics and cost. And then in April, having a workshop thinking about how you might put this into practice. But you needn't wait for those events to get involved. Please do pick up your copy of the framework, have a request a print copy if you're interested, and keep in touch with us if you've got ideas, both for how we can get the message out about the project. And probably speaking on the Today programme on Radio 4, the Sunday programme on Radio 4 next Sunday morning, but we're keen to find other ways of letting people know about our work. And we'd be really glad to hear from you, as we said, if you've got ideas for how else we could be supporting you in you making use of the framework in your context. We've got contact details there, so please do keep in touch with us. And thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to have this chance to introduce the framework, and we look forward to working with you in the coming year.